Chalo ji, let's start the class. Last time very few people were there, but we were discussing about some case studies. In your syllabus, we will have theoretical questions also, and we will have some case study based questions as well. So last time, before moving on to other case studies, we'll discuss what we were discussing last time. I'll briefly tell you कि क्या discuss किया था हमने. One was Bretton Woods Agreement. Do you know about Bretton Woods Agreement? Yes, मौसम, भारत. Bretton Woods Agreement नहीं पता? जो वर्ल्ड बैंक और IMF बने थे वो इसी के बाद बने थे. कब बने थे? In 1945. During when the Second World War was ending, that time this Bretton Woods conference was held, जिसमें अलग-अलग लोग आए थे from all over the world representing different countries, and overall the main objective was to bring global cooperation, क्योंकि इतना war वगैरह हो चुका था, all the economies are suffering because of this. So in 1944 this Bretton Woods conference was held. And we all know about Keynes. Keynesian economics is very famous. So Keynes was there, and another economist, Harry White, was there. These two people were the main brains behind this conference. And लोगों ने सोचा था कि we should all come together and foster global cooperation. ठीक है, तो इसमें mainly तो IMF और World Bank establish हुए थे to bring about international cooperation to help countries that are lagging behind, developing countries, and also countries that need funds to meet their liquidity problems. If they need funds in the short term, that also should be met, and if they need long term funds, that also should be provided. ठीक है, तो इसमें मेन जो चीज़ थी वो एक stability in exchange rate was one thing. Apart from these financial institutions that were established, another important thing was stability in exchange rates. तो उस टाइम पे एक अभी you know how exchange rates are determined? By demand and supply only. Free market forces हैं, although central banks and government intervene करती हैं. अगर डॉलर बहुत तेज़ी से अप्रिशिएट हो रहा है तो गवर्नमेंट विल कम इन, स्टेप इन, एंड दे विल स्टार्ट सेलिंग डॉलर्स. तो दिस वे दे कैन कंट्रोल how much exchange rate is fluctuating. So right now it's a floating exchange rate which depends on market forces. उस टाइम पे to bring because वहाँ पे बहुत ज़्यादा global exchange war हो रहा था, because countries wanted to focus on promoting their exports, and for that they were depreciating their currencies. अपना devalue कर देते थे to make their exports more cheaper globally. और उस चीज़ को प्रिवेंट करने के लिए, स्टेबिलिटी लाने के लिए एक्सचेंज रेट में, दे हैड द सिस्टम ऑफ फिक्स्ड एक्सचेंज रेट्स वेयर ऑल द करेंसीज वर फिक्स्ड विद रिस्पेक्ट टू डॉलर. डॉलर वाज द मेन करेंसी. हर एक करेंसी डॉलर के कंपैरिजन में फिक्स्ड रखी गई थी, सो दैट देयर इज़ मोर स्टेबिलिटी इन द ग्लोबल फाइनेंशियल सिस्टम. और डॉलर की वैल्यू गोल्ड रिजर्व्स के बेस पे होती थी कि कितना गोल्ड रिजर्व है, उसकी बैकिंग होती थी. ईच एंड एवरी डॉलर वाज बैक्ड बाय सप्लाई ऑफ गोल्ड. क्यों रहा है? क्योंकि यूएस एज वी नो इज़ द बिगेस्ट इकोनॉमी इन द ग्लोबली. उस टाइम पे भी काफ़ी प्रोमिनेंट थी, और इंडिपेंडेंस जैसे इंडिया को तो 1947 में मिली है, बट उनको बाकी कंट्रीज़ को like जो US है, it got independence 350 years from now. ठीक है, मतलब अराउंड 1700s में इंडिपेंडेंस मिली थी US को. तो उस टाइम से, और इट इज़ द बिगेस्ट कैपिटलिस्ट इकोनॉमी. एंड देयर, यस वैभव, हाउ आर यू? फाइन. तो राइट, सो डॉलर वाज द मोस्ट प्रोमिनेंट करेंसी, और सारी कंट्रीज़ ने मिल करके डिसाइड किया कि इसको हमें सेंटर बनाना है, and every currency should be fixed with respect to dollar. And dollar के लिए there is backing of gold reserves. तो ये सिस्टम चल रहा था from 1944 till the 1970s. ये ब्रेटन वुड्स का एग्रीमेंट चलते रहा, जिसमें पर later on it was decided mutually because of multiple factors कि हमें फ्लोटिंग एक्सचेंज रेट अब हम ला सकते हैं, जो स्टेबिलिटी हमको चाहिए थी उस टाइम पे ड्यूरिंग द आफ्टर द सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर, दैट नीड इज डन. नाउ वी कैन ब्रिंग market forces and everything, then we shifted from fixed exchange rate system to floating exchange rate system. तो इसके बारे में थोड़ा सा पता होना चाहिए ब्रेटन वुड्स के बारे में, क्योंकि एज वी नो IMF and World Bank are important institutions and you can get questions on IMF, World Bank. उस टाइम पे ब्रेटन वुड्स के बारे में लिख सकते हैं if there is a short note on World Bank or IMF, or if you are asked to differentiate between IMF and World Bank, you can also mention about this Bretton Woods conference की significance क्या थी इस conference की. Right, so this was one thing we were discussing, and second thing that we had discussed was related to green finance. Again, a very significant part of Unit 1 is green finance, sustainable finance, which is a new emerging theme globally. This was again the thing that we were discussing last time, कि क्यों इसकी importance हो रही है और किस तरीके से नए नए चीज़ें आ गई हैं to promote sustainable finance, right? So these are some of the things which are upcoming, new themes which are there: green bonds, green loans, investment funds, impact investing, green venture capital, green insurance, green taxonomy, green banking. तो in terms के बारे में थोड़ा थोड़ा पता होना चाहिए, so that when you're writing about green finance, you should be able to mention about all of these things. At least write 1 or 2 lines about each of these things when you are asked about sustainable finance. ठीक है. ग्रीन बॉन्ड्स क्या होते हैं? वैभव, डू यू रिमेंबर क्या डिस्कस किया था हमने? गुड. तो अगर रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी के कोई प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं और या इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स के हैं, उसमें अगर फंडिंग लग रही है एंड फॉर दैट यू आर रेजिंग डेट in the form of bonds or debentures, that those would be known as green bonds, right? So funding in the form of debt for sustainable projects, renewable energy or solar power or all these things would be example of green bond. Green loan is again a debt financing but given by financial institutions. तो bonds जो होते हैं वो as we know are traded on financial markets, while loans are given by financial institutions like banks and NBFCs. Investment funds we know. Impact investing का मतलब पता है? Impact investing is a very new emerging field. उसका मतलब ये है कि as an investor you are looking to invest in projects that are doing something good for the social welfare, सोसाइटी के लिए, इन्वायरमेंट के लिए, कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस के लिए जो फंड्स लग रहे हैं, अगर आप उन कंपनीज में इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हो, दैट वुड बी एन एग्जांपल ऑफ इम्पैक्ट इन्वेस्टिंग. तो कुछ इन्वेस्टर्स हैं जो स्पेसिफिकली ऐसी कंपनीज में इन्वेस्ट करना चाहते हैं विच आर डूइंग समथिंग गुड फॉर द ओवरऑल इन्वायरमेंट, फॉर द सोसाइटी, एंड नॉट ओनली फोकसिंग ऑन देयर प्रॉफिट मोटिव. जैसे देयर इज अ कंपनी HCL Tech. डू यू नो फाउंडर ऑफ HCL Tech? शिव नाडर है ना. शिव नाडर, उनकी वहाँ पे फाउंडेशंस भी हैं बहुत सारी, उन्होंने स्कूल्स खोल रखे हैं, इंस्टीट्यूशंस खोल रखे हैं. तो राइट, सो ही इज़ कॉन्ट्रीब्यूटिंग एवरी डे 6 करोड़ रुपीज़. यू नो मतलब कि कितना हो गया? 6 करोड़ इंटू 365. तो ओवरऑल इन थाउजेंड्स ऑफ करोड़ ही इज़ कॉन्ट्रीब्यूटिंग एवरी ईयर. हाँ, फाउंडेशन है. वो कंपनियाँ क्यों करती हैं ये? वन रीज़न इज़ बिकॉज इट इम्प्रूव्स देयर इमेज. उनकी इमेज इम्प्रूव होगी. जैसे टाटाज आर नोन फॉर देयर एथिकल प्रैक्टिसेस. तो अगर सब लोग मानते हैं कि दे आर डूइंग गुड फॉर द एनवायरनमेंट, फॉर सोसाइटी, फॉर ओवरऑल वेलफेयर, देन दे वुड लाइक टू इन्वेस्ट इन दिस काइंड ऑफ कंपनी. सिमिलरली दूसरा रीज़न एक ये भी हो सकता है कि इससे उनको बहुत सारे टैक्स बेनिफिट्स मिलते हैं, है ना, डोनेशंस वगैरह की वजह. इवन इफ़ यू डू योर ओन डोनेशंस, तो वी हैव अ सेक्शन, विच इज़ दैट सेक्शन, डू यू नो? सेक्शन एक तो 80C है, वेरी कॉमन, जिसमें 80E इज नहीं, दैट इज़ फॉर एजुकेशन लोन्स. 80G, यस, 80G इज़ फॉर डोनेशंस. 80C में तो वही सब आता है, PPF आता है, और क्या आता है? ELSS, इक्विटी लिंक्ड सेविंग स्कीम्स, लाइफ इंश्योरेंस, लोन्स जो ले रखे हैं, लोन का प्रिंसिपल कंपोनेंट 80C में आता है, लोन का इंटरेस्ट कंपोनेंट 24B में आता है. फाइन. तो दीज आर सम इम्पॉर्टेंट सेक्शंस इन आवर इनकम टैक्स एक्ट जिसके बेस पे हमको टैक्स रिलीफ मिलता है. सिमिलरली फॉर कॉर्पोरेट्स ऑल्सो, इफ दे आर कॉन्ट्रीब्यूटिंग फॉर द सोशल वेलफेयर और फॉर environment's benefit, that also gives them some tax benefits. Plus companies are diverting funds, वो तो गलत बात है, but most of the companies are using these foundations to for money laundering and other kind of things. तो इसीलिए but nowadays this theme is becoming very popular, especially in developed countries. इंडिया में इतना अभी नहीं है कॉन्सेप्ट इस चीज़ का, बट ग्रेजुअली वी आर ऑल्सो मूविंग इन दैट डायरेक्शन. जैसे HCL टेक के फाउंडर हैं, विप्रो के फाउंडर हैं अजीम प्रेम जी, राइट. रिलायंस इज ऑल्सो डूइंग दिस काइंड ऑफ थिंग. Okay, fine. So there are multiple examples where companies are doing good for the environment, and major reason is because it is boosting their image in the overall environment, investment community also. Green venture capital, जैसे शार्क टैंक में कुछ बिजनेस आइडियाज़ आते हैं, सम ऑफ देम आर डूइंग समथिंग गुड फॉर द इन्वायरमेंट. कि जैसे कोई किसी ने बनाया था एक मेंस्ट्रुअल पैड्स को, हाँ, उसकी मशीन बनाई थी. फाइन. तो हालांकि वो प्रॉफिटेबल नहीं थी, कुछ भी नहीं था उनका, बट स्टिल दे वर फंडिंग इट. वाई? बिकॉज दे आर वर्किंग टुवर्ड्स अ सोशल कॉज and it improves their image also. As an investor, if you are investing in such kind of projects, everyone thinks of you very positively. और प्लस इसका इजीली ऐसे प्रोजेक्ट्स को फंडिंग आराम से कंपैरेटिवली इजीली मिल जाती है. ग्रीन इंश्योरेंस. व्हाट इज ग्रीन इंश्योरेंस? अगेन इंश्योरेंस फॉर सच काइंड ऑफ रिन्यूएबल प्रोजेक्ट्स. जो रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी के प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं उनके लिए अगर इंश्योरेंस ले रहे हैं तो दैट वुड बी एग्जांपल ऑफ ग्रीन इंश्योरेंस. ग्रीन टैक्सोनॉमी. टैक्सोनॉमी मीन्स कि डिफाइनिंग ईच एंड एवरी टर्म प्रॉपरली. तो अब बहुत सारे लूप होल्स थे जिसका कॉर्पोरेट्स और ये लोग फ़ायदा उठाते हैं कभी कभार. तो प्रॉपर डिफाइन होंगे अगर सारे टर्म्स कि CSR का एग्जैक्टली क्या मतलब है, इम्पैक्ट इन्वेस्टिंग का क्या मतलब है, ESG में क्या क्या चीज़ें आती हैं. तो ऑल दीज थिंग्स इफ़ दे आर प्रॉपरली डिफाइंड देन इट बिकम्स द सिस्टम बिकम्स मोर ट्रांसपेरेंट. तो ग्रीन टैक्सोनॉमी, तो ऑल कंट्रीज आर डिफाइनिंग कि उनके टर्म्स में CSR में क्या क्या चीज़ें आ रही हैं एग्जैक्टली. Fine. So all these things are important. These are important terms that you can write when you are asked about green finance. So I'll show you. This is again there in Unit 1. If we see, इसमें growing concern for green trades. So this sustainable finance is now becoming a very integral part of international finance. और इसमें कुछ कुछ कंट्रीज़ हैं लाइक फ्रांस, लाइक चाइना, जिन्होंने काफ़ी ग्रीन बॉन्ड्स और ग्रीन फाइनेंस के ऊपर काम किया है. तो आई विल बी शेयरिंग दिस प्रेजेंटेशन विद यू एज वेल. तो देर आर लॉट ऑफ कंट्रीज़, स्पेशली फ्रांस, स्पेशली चाइना, that are focusing on such kind of green projects. ठीक है. Fine. So this was what we were discussing last time. Today we'll take up a few case studies which are again important from your exam point of view. One is the let's take 2008 crisis. 2008 crisis में what was the role played by all these international agencies? What was the role played by governments? How was international finance operating during this time of crisis? So this is again one important topic. We'll also look at COVID crisis, COVID economic crisis, how all the international agencies came together to improve this situation. Whenever there is a crisis, there is need for collaboration by all these international agencies. You have trade groupings like EU and NAFTA and SAFTA and ASEAN and all, SARC. So BRICS, exactly. So all of them come together and try to help improve the situation. Fine. So we should know a little bit about these important events like 2008 crisis, like COVID economic crisis. Plus there are more things also that you can read about. जैसे Silicon Valley Bank crash हुआ था. तो है ना, रिसेंटली हुआ था, अभी 2-3 साल पहले ही। तो दीज काइंड ऑफ थिंग्स, या जैसे एक बहुत पहले एक एनरॉन का स्कैम हुआ था इंटरनेशनली, तो उसमें भी काफ़ी सारे न्यू चेंजेस आए थे। न्यू इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल स्टेबिलिटी FSB बना था, फाइनेंशियल स्टेबिलिटी बोर्ड। तो वी यू नीड टू नो अबाउट ऑल दीज थिंग्स कि एनरॉन में क्या हुआ था, 2008 crisis, COVID economic crisis, Silicon Valley crash. तो all these are important things that you should be aware of. इसमें से किसी के ऊपर भी क्वेश्चन आ सकता है, especially all these major events like 2008 crisis, like COVID economic crisis, that we'll be discussing in detail today. 2008 crisis I've already told you होता क्या है exactly, you know कि why it happened. It was because there were loans were being given out to because interest rates were low, everyone was taking loans, and banks were also giving out loans to each and everyone, and that is why it is known as subprime mortgage crisis. Mortgage, we understand, mortgage loans होते हैं जिसमें कुछ गिरवी रखवा करके, collateral रखवा करके you are giving housing loans. Fine. So why is it called subprime mortgage crisis? Because you are giving mortgage loans to subprime borrowers which are below the best. Sub matlab below, prime means best. So below the best borrowers, people who are not having proper repayment capacity, you are even giving loans to these kind of people as well. और इसी वजह से जब सबने लोन ले लिया और फिर gradually the housing prices also, when interest rates increased, when everyone was taking loans, interest rates started increasing, and if interest rates increase, your EMIs will start increasing also, and then people found it difficult to repay their loans. When people were not able to repay, then banks used that collateral and went to sell the properties. जब सब लोग सेल करने आ रहे हैं, सारे इंस्टीट्यूशंस सेल करना चाह रहे हैं टू रिकवर देयर फंड्स, and nobody is there to buy, that will the housing prices will start crashing, and that is exactly what happened. Housing bubble crashed when interest rates started increasing and people were unable to repay the loans. Banks, when they went to sell, to liquidate the assets in order to recover their loans, they were not getting the all the capital, and most of the institutions, especially big investment banks, started going bankrupt. You have big investment banks. Which was the first bank to go bankrupt? Lehman Brothers. हाँ, उससे पहले भी हुआ था कुछ. Do you know? Enron तो बहुत पहले हुआ था, वो नहीं. Bear Stearns is the first bank, investment bank जो crash हुआ था. उसको गवर्नमेंट ने सेव कर लिया था उस टाइम पे, पर उसके बाद लेमन ब्रदर्स का क्रैश हुआ था in 2008, which led to the downfall, जिसकी वजह से और इम्पैक्ट आया बाकी इंस्टीट्यूशंस पे, इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज पे, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक्स पे, कमर्शियल बैंक्स पे. ऑल सेक्टर्स वर इम्पैक्टेड बिकॉज ऑफ दिस क्राइसिस. क्योंकि अगर एक बैंक भी क्रैश होगा, बड़ा बैंक, दैट विल लीड टू पैनिक इन द सिस्टम, एंड इफ एवरीवन स्टार्ट्स पैनिकिंग, ऑल द डिपॉजिटर्स विल लाइक टू विड्रॉ देयर फंड्स. जो भी उन्होंने डिपॉजिट किया है बैंक्स में, अगर हर एक कोई विड्रॉ करना चाहेगा, और बैंक्स ने लोन दे रखे होते हैं तो उनके पास एकदम से पैसा आएगा नहीं. प्लस व्हेन दे गो टू सेल देयर एसेट्स, उनको हाउसिंग प्राइसेस हैव कोलैप्स्ड बिकॉज एवरीवन इज सेलिंग, नोबडी इज बाइंग, and because of this kind of situation, banks were unable to recover their funds, they were not able to repay the borrowers, and this led to big panic overall in the system. और इसी में एक दो चीज़ें और पता होना चाहिए कि देर आर टर्म्स लाइक मॉर्गेज बैक सिक्योरिटीज, कोलैटरलाइज्ड डेट ऑब्लिगेशंस, क्रेडिट डिफॉल्ट स्वैप्स, CDS, CDOs एंड MBS. These are three important terms that you need to know कि MBS क्या होता है, mortgage backed securities. Collateralized debt obligations are also similar. You have credit default swaps also. So can you explain the meaning of MBS, mortgage backed securities? Yes, Vaibhav? Okay. MBS, does anyone know? Mortgage backed securities. हाँ, exactly right. हाँ हाँ, ओके, ठीक है, ओके, हाँ हाँ, ठीक है, गुड. तो फाइन, यू आर पार्शली राइट कि मॉर्गेज बैक सिक्योरिटीज़ क्या होते हैं कि बैंक्स ने मॉर्गेज लोन्स दे रखे हैं, उन लोन्स को वो एक साथ इकट्ठा करते हैं और इन्वेस्टर्स को बेच देते हैं। तो इन्वेस्टर्स उन लोन्स में एक तरीके से इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं इनडायरेक्टली, और जब जो पेमेंट आएगा लोन से वो इन्वेस्टर्स के पास जाएगा, तो जो इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है वो इन्वेस्टर्स को मिल रहा है, ना कि बैंक को, और बैंक को इमीडिएट फंड्स मिल रहे हैं। जैसे हम बॉन्ड्स बेचते हैं, तो बॉन्ड्स विच हैव अ बैकिंग ऑफ दीज मॉर्गेज लोन्स इज आर कॉल्ड मॉर्गेज बैक सिक्योरिटीज, है ना। सिक्योरिटाइजेशन, एग्जैक्टली। तो सिक्योरिटाइजेशन क्या होता है कि व्हेन यू आर collecting all these other assets and selling it to other investors, that is called securitization। इसमें भी यही हो रहा है, यू बैंक का एसेट क्या है कि उन्होंने लोन दे रखा है, वो उनका एसेट है ना, और उस एसेट को उन्होंने लिया और इकट्ठा करके इन्वेस्टर्स को दे दिया। इन्वेस्टर्स ने उन लोन में एक तरीके से इन्वेस्ट किया और जो इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है वो इन्वेस्टर्स के पास जा रहा है। पर प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि अगर if borrowers start defaulting, they are unable to repay, then who will pay the price of this? The investors, है ना। तो अब क्योंकि बैंक्स इसी वजह से ज़्यादा लोन भी दे रहे थे, उन्हें पता है कि वो इन लोन को इकट्ठा करके सारे इन्वेस्टर्स को बेच सकते हैं, तो इसलिए रिस्क तो ट्रांसफ़र हो गया ना। दैट इज़ द रीज़न वाई दे वर गिविंग आउट लोन्स विदाउट डूइंग प्रॉपर चेक्स। दे फेल्ट दैट वी विल इवेंचुअली गेट ऑल द मनी, जो भी रिस्क है दैट इज़ बीइंग borne by the investors। Fine, so this is mortgage backed security। Similarly, collateralized debt obligations are also similar। उसमें क्या होता है कि mortgage backed securities को ही you divide into different tranches। जो सबसे senior tranche है वो मतलब सबसे less risky loans, जो junior tranches हैं they are much more risky compared to the senior tranche। तो अब हमारे borrowers जो high risk वाले borrowers हैं उनको आप लोअर ट्रांच में दे दोगे, जो इन्वेस्टर ज़्यादा रिस्क लेना चाहते हैं, जिनको ज़्यादा रिटर्न भी चाहिए, वो लोग लोअर ट्रांच में इन्वेस्ट करेंगे, है ना। सीनियर ट्रांच में ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट मिलेगा, लोअर इंटरेस्ट मिलेगा, व्हाट डू यू थिंक? लो, बिकॉज दैट इज़ वेरी सिक्योर ट्रांच एंड इफ द रिस्क इज लेस यू विल गेट लोअर रिटर्न्स। फाइन, तो CDOs भी आर अ फॉर्म ऑफ मॉर्गेज बैक्ड सिक्योरिटीज ओनली, बट इन दिस case you are dividing these MBS into different tranches, senior tranche, junior tranche, depending on how much risk is there, risk of default, depending on the risk of default। And because of these kind of things, because of MBS, CDOs and CDS, the banks were giving out loans very aggressively। they felt कि हमारा तो कोई रिस्क है ही नहीं, जो भी रिस्क है वो इन्वेस्टर का है, तो जितना देना देते जाओ। और क्रेडिट डिफॉल्ट स्वैप्स क्या होते हैं? दे आर ऑल्सो सिमिलर काइंड ऑफ इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स, वेरी कॉम्प्लिकेटेड थिंग्स। एक दिस इज लाइक एन इंश्योरेंस, दैट इंश्योरेंस इन केस ऑफ डिफॉल्ट। क्रेडिट डिफॉल्ट स्वैप मीन्स यू आर स्वैपिंग योर रिस्क ऑफ क्रेडिट डिफॉल्ट। जो क्रेडिट पे डिफॉल्ट हो सकता है बोरोवर्स का, यू आर ट्रांसफरिंग योर रिस्क टू सम अदर पार्टी विच इज यूजुअली द इंश्योरेंस कंपनी। तो क्रेडिट डिफॉल्ट स्वैप्स along with CDO, along with MBS, made the system very complicated and banks felt कि हमारा risk नहीं है, इसलिए they were giving out loans to each and every person। Fine, तो ये इस वजह से पूरा crisis हुआ था, that you now understand। और इसी का फिर impact हुआ on other sectors। Fine, stock market crash हुआ था इंडिया में भी, it crashed by how much? Almost 60%। 60% क्रैश हुआ था। कोविड में भी 40% हुआ, यहाँ पे 60% हुआ था। दिस वॉज वन ऑफ द बिगेस्ट क्रैशेज इन द पास्ट 100 years, अपार्ट फ्रॉम ग्रेट डिप्रेशन को छोड़ करके ग्लोबली सबसे बड़ा क्राइसिस तो यही था। फाइन, इम्पैक्ट वॉज देयर ऑन स्टॉक मार्केट्स, ऑन इकोनॉमी, रिसेशन हुआ था, everyone was losing jobs, unemployment was very high, and then it had an impact on European debt market also। Countries like Greece, Italy, they started defaulting। जो countries ने भी debt ले रखा होता है, and they also started defaulting because of similar kind of reason। There was panic in the market, and yes, Sanvi, why are you so late? सोते रह जाते हैं, आलसी बच्चे हो गए हैं सब। So this is now what we are coming to the most important thing, ki the impact on international business environment and the role of these international agencies, including IMF, World Bank and the trading blocs in controlling this crisis. Fine. So we are right now, for people who are coming late, we are discussing some case studies which a similar kind of thing may be asked in your exam. Apart from theoretical question, you may have some case-based studies also, where you may have to explain the role of these international institutions in times of different crises, including the 2008 crisis, including COVID economic crisis, including things like this Silicon Valley bank crash, including things like Enron crisis. So all these different scams and crises that have happened, what was the role of these international agencies in stabilizing the overall global environment? तो अब जब भी कोई मेजर क्राइसिस होता है उसका इम्पैक्ट ग्लोबल फाइनेंशियल सिस्टम पे आता है, एज वी हैव सीन दैट कैन हैव इम्पैक्ट ऑन investment banks, on commercial banks, on insurance companies, on investors as well, FIIs, DIs, everyone can be impacted. It can have an impact on international governments, like what happened in European debt crisis. Countries started defaulting, like Greece and Italy, they were unable to repay their debts. It had an impact on consumer demand also, right? So what do you think, will it impact the import or export? This kind of crisis, will it have an impact on import and export? क्या impact होगा? Yes, मौसम? Export कम हो जाएंगे. किसके export कम होंगे? जहाँ पे crisis हो रहा है उस जगह का या फिर कहीं और का? कहीं और का, exactly. क्योंकि if US is one of the biggest importers globally and there is less demand in the economy, there is recession, that will obviously have an impact on the demand for imports also. And it will, for countries like India, countries like China, which are importing in large quantities to US, we will also suffer as a result of this. It led to supply chain disruptions also. Inventory production became difficult. Merger acquisition पे भी impact हुआ. International mergers and acquisitions we were discussing earlier. So in times of any major recession or any major crisis, international deals don't happen. Investors are also apprehensive, they are scared to invest in other countries. They, उस time पे जब भी कोई uncertainty होती है, people start withdrawing their capital from other countries. वहाँ से निकाल करके और कहाँ पे डालते हैं? In assets like gold, which is it has a very negative inverse correlation with stock market. Gold, when the stock markets are crashing or debt markets are not doing well, that is the time when people start investing very aggressively in assets like gold. Fine. तो उस time पे जब भी ऐसा कुछ होता है, when 2008 also happened, all investors started withdrawing capital from foreign countries. There was outflow, and that is the reason our market also crashed by almost 60%. Fine. So capital outflow, that is one major impact. Merger acquisitions will not happen. That is another big impact. Plus less consumer demand leading to lower imports by countries like US. And countries also start imposing these trade barriers that we have discussed earlier. There are many kinds of trade barriers that can be imposed by countries, including tariffs, including quotas, limits on imports, the quantity of imports, limit the taxes on custom duties and everything. Fine. So protectionism may happen because the first priority of the government is to protect their domestic economy. कि हमारी country पे US में जो हो रहा है उसका impact नहीं आना चाहिए. Fine. So our government will also start imposing all these custom duties. We'll have quotas and restrictions, and maybe some more permits and licenses that will be required. These are all forms of barriers to trade, and this usually happens in case of any major shock in the financial system. Plus, there was impact on commodity prices as well. Oil prices fell. Similar thing happened in 2000. Yes. होते हैं, but that time no, all the countries are doing the same thing. Nobody is objecting. WTO is also formed of different countries. Everyone is coming together to discuss on a common platform, right? And if all the countries agree that this is the time to protect our domestic economy, then the same thing will happen. Commodity prices even crashed during COVID. You know, it even went down to negative. You know that? Negative. जैसे $100 per barrel जो usually रहता था price of crude oil, it went into negative territory. जो futures contract, जो cash में जो actual commodity है, that was trading for around $20 per barrel. मनमोहन सिंह के टाइम पे it used to be around $100. Right now also it's around $70 crude oil. पर उस टाइम पे कोविड के टाइम पे because there was no demand, economies were totally shutting down, हर जगह लॉकडाउन हो रहा था, तो there was no major demand for oil, and that was the reason oil prices totally collapsed. If you see the graph of crude oil, 2020 के around में it fell down to almost $20 per barrel. और जो futures के prices थे, that was in trading in negative. Why do you think it was? How can it be negative? क्योंकि अगर किसी ने फ्यूचर्स में बाय कर रखा है तो उसको उसकी लायबिलिटी है कि उसको एक पर्टिकुलर प्राइस पे बाय करना ही पड़ेगा, और उस चीज़ को स्टोर कहाँ पे करोगे, उसका स्टोरिंग का प्रॉब्लम है, उसको प्रोक्योर करने का प्रॉब्लम है. फाइन. सो दैट वाज द रीजन व्हाई फ्यूचर्स देयर वाज नो डिमांड इन द इकोनॉमी. यू कैन नॉट सेल द क्रूड ऑयल. तो इफ यू आर होल्डिंग ऑन टू ऑल दीज इन्वेंटरीज, दैट वुड नॉट मेक एनी सेंस. Fine. So anyway, the crude oil prices, commodity prices can also be impacted because of impact on the global financial system. FDI was also reduced. Like I told you, it has an impact on international capital flows whenever there is a major event globally. Another major consequence was that governments started interfering much more. Governments started introducing all these stimulus packages in the countries, different countries, in US and India as well. अभी do you know recently COVID में क्या किया था गवर्नमेंट ने? कुछ measure लिया था इकोनॉमी को stabilize करने के लिए या नहीं? कुछ नहीं किया. What did the government do during COVID? Do you know? इकोनॉमी को स्टेबलाइज करने के लिए. यस, मेडिसिन एक्सपोर्ट किया था. आई एम आस्किंग इंटरनल इकोनॉमी को स्टेबलाइज करने के लिए क्या किया था? कि इकोनॉमी में रिसेशन हो रहा है या फिर कॉन्ट्रैक्शन हो रहा है इकोनॉमी में, पीपल आर लूजिंग जॉब्स, देन व्हाट कैन द गवर्नमेंट डू टू स्टिमुलेट द इकोनॉमी? कि हाँ, फंडिंग. यस, गुड. इतने सारे पैकेजेस निकाले थे जो इफ़ यू उस टाइम पे जो बजट आया था, निर्मला सीतारमन अनाउंस इतने सारे स्टिमुलस पैकेजेस कि हम ये भी लोन देंगे, वो भी लोन देंगे, लोन्स टू SMEs, लोन टू बिग बिजनेसेस, लोन टू एवरीवन. तो दे वर गिविंग अनाउंसिंग ऑल काइंड्स ऑफ लोन्स एंड स्कीम्स टू प्रमोट द स्मॉल बिजनेसेस, क्योंकि स्पेशली मेजर इम्पैक्ट वॉज ऑन स्मॉल एंटरप्राइजेस. We had the impact of demonetization first, we had the impact of GST, introduction of GST, we then had the impact of COVID, and because of this, small businesses were totally shutting down. तो उनको प्रमोट करने के लिए गवर्नमेंट ने उस टाइम पे 2020 में बजट स्पीच में ये सब अनाउंस हुए थे, बहुत सारे मेजर्स इंक्लूडिंग ऑल दीज स्टिमुलस पैकेजेस वेयर दे वर गिविंग आउट लोन्स टू ईच एंड एवरी वन. सिमिलर थिंग हैपेंड इन 2008. गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत सारे पैकेजेस, ट्रिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स के पैकेजेस अनाउंस किए थे, कोविड में भी अनाउंस किए थे टू स्टिमुलेट द इकोनॉमी. एंड मोस्ट ऑफ दीज पैकेजेस आर नॉट, दे आर नॉट freely giving out funds, they are giving at an interest rate but a nominal interest. And then rules and regulations were made more stringent. जैसे एक डॉट फ्रैंक एक्ट आया था कि टू प्रिवेंट banks from lending so aggressively, and plus like I told you, this was also a result of these complicated products financial products like mortgage-backed securities, like collateralized debt obligations, and credit default swaps. Because of these kind of things, all the big banks were thinking that the risk is not ours. Even if people start defaulting, all the costs will be borne by the investors. We are securitizing all our assets and selling to the investors. Therefore, even if people start defaulting, we will not pay the cost of this. The investors will lose as a result, and we are anyway selling off the securities to them. Now coming to international institutions, institutions like IMF, like WTO were at this point of time addressing all these issues. Like if you look at IMF, they again started providing funding facilities, especially to countries like Greece, Italy, which were defaulting on their debt payments. I will be uploading all the slides. You can take the pictures also, no problem, but I will be uploading all the slides. This one also, the other presentation that we will be discussing. Fine, so they announced a lot of packages for countries like Greece, like Italy, especially countries that were facing liquidity problems. Fine. Exactly. And then coming to WTO, like what Sanvi was saying, exactly the same thing happened. WTO was looking after these protectionism done by different countries, because that can have a negative impact on many countries, especially countries like China or that are importing very aggressively. These countries will suffer a lot if all the countries are becoming protectionist. They are imposing barriers to trade like tariffs and quotas and restrictions and everything. Right. So WTO was there. They were making sure that discrimination is not being done between the domestic industries and the international agencies. Right. World Bank, like you know, generally supports developing countries which are facing problems of poverty, of unemployment, of lack of education and healthcare facilities, lack of proper sanitation and water and other resources. So they were looking after all the poor countries that were lagging behind. They were suffering a lot as a result of this crisis. Many of the developing countries are actually exporting nations, and due to this crisis they were suffering a lot since demand was less globally, and they were not being able to export to different countries. Right. BIS, Bank for International Settlement, that introduced the Basel III norms. Have you read about Basel III, Basel I, Basel II, Basel III? These are different norms used to standardize banking across the different countries. Fine, there should be uniform banking standards across different countries globally. What is the reason for having uniform standards? Because nowadays banks are lending across different countries. Like banks in US will be lending to companies in other countries. Similarly, banks in India will be lending to companies in other countries. That is the reason there is need to ensure uniformity of standards across different countries globally. So Basel III norms made it more stringent कि बैंक्स के पास इतना कैपिटल एडिक्वेसी रेशो होना चाहिए, बैंक्स का इतना CRR होना ज़रूरी है, SLR होना ज़रूरी है. All these things are essential, otherwise there will be too much risk in the system, and foreign investors would not like to, or even foreign companies would not like to engage in with banks in other countries that are not having all these proper standards. Fine. So Basel III norms again were introduced after the 2008 crisis. और इस पूरे क्राइसिस में G20 का भी बहुत मेजर रोल था. G20 are the top 20 biggest developed countries. They are contributing maximum to the global economy, and they came together and formulated different strategies for coordinated approach so as to minimize the impact of this recession. And then looking at regional trade blocks, we have groupings like European Union, like NAFTA and all. They also played a very significant role. NAFTA, as we know, has 3 major countries: United States, Canada and Mexico. Now it is known as USMCA. NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, is now known as USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. And these 3 countries, again, because they were suffering a lot as a result of this recession, they came together and formulated strategies to stabilize the countries. European Union helped the sovereign debt crisis, especially nations like Italy and all, Greece, Portugal. ASEAN was looking after the Asian countries, and this Mercosur was for the South American nations, Brazil, Argentina and all. They were trying to stabilize the commodity prices and also trying to reduce these barriers to trade. Then, as we know, Unit 3 and 4 are about international investments in our course. Unit 1 and 2 are about international trade. Fine. One has international trade theories and distribution issues and all these different factors impacting international business, economic factors, financial factors, geopolitical and all these factors. All this is part of Unit 1. Unit 2 has the trading blocks. Unit 3 is about international investments, and Unit 4 is about international agencies like World Bank and IMF. So we should also be knowing about the international investment, how is it impacted by these different crises. Usually capital flows out of different countries. Investors like to keep everything in cash and not in securities, especially not abroad, and that leads to capital outflows, especially from developing countries. Fine. So these are major impacts of global financial crisis. Basel III was one important measure that was taken. Dodd-Frank Act and European financial reforms, Financial Stability Board, like I was telling you, central bank policy, quantitative easing means expansionary fiscal policy, expansionary monetary policy. These were happening, like negative or zero interest rates. You have you have measures taken by G20 and IMF reforms. Fine. So most of these things we have discussed. Even credit rating agencies globally were not playing a proper role. Like we have different credit rating agencies globally, S&P, you have Moody's, Fitch rating, all these are rating agencies that rate governments also. Apart from corporate entities, they rate government, how safe are these government securities. Fine, they are rating all these government securities, AAA rating, BB rating, all these kind of ratings are given, and they were not performing their proper role. Otherwise, we would have got to know all this situation earlier on, that banks were becoming insolvent. Similarly, countries were defaulting. They were not revising their ratings on time. After all the things have happened, then they gave a junk rating to Italy and Greece, but that should have happened much before. Fine, so even credit rating agencies are not doing their proper role at that point of time. Fine, so this is about 2008 crisis. Let's take a short 5-minute break, then we'll discuss one more important thing. That's the last thing we'll do for today, and that is the COVID economic crisis. Okay, please sit down. Vaibhav. Yes, can we continue? क्योंकि gossip खत्म नहीं होती, that is a different problem. So we are talking about COVID-19 now. COVID-19 is another major event that happened recently. उसका impact भी काफ़ी major था, and we need to know the role of these international agencies, international institutions, how they helped manage this crisis. COVID, so we all know what is COVID. This is the impact. Do you know how many people died? 70 lakh. 7 million. 70 lakh. बस बस तो नहीं है ये. देखे जाए तो नॉर्मल कोर्स ऑफ डेज से तो बहुत कम है. 70 lakh people died, and there was 3.4% contraction in the global economy. Global economy हर साल कितना बढ़ती है? Do you know? India's economy GDP growth, you know, how much is that? Around 6-7%, right? So what is the overall growth of the global economy? 9%? Around 3%. It's around 3% globally. क्योंकि you have developed countries also which are growing at a slower pace. अगर US जैसी इकोनॉमी है जिसका $50 trillion का GDP हो रखा है, तो वो इतनी फास्ट से ग्रो नहीं कर सकते in terms of percentage. Even 2 or 3% for US is a very high growth rate. But for India, which is $4 trillion, even if we are growing at 6-7%, that is very less. है ना? In absolute terms, percentage में लग रहा है ठीक है ज़्यादा है US से, लेकिन in absolute terms it's much lower. Fine. So globally, if you take into account developed countries and developing countries, all the countries put together, they have a growth of around 3% overall. And during COVID, the global economy collapsed by almost 3.5%. This is according to IMF estimate, and we know the impact will be on obviously international trade, also on commodity demand. Overall demand will reduce, and that will impact import export of different countries, especially developing countries that are highly dependent on export revenue. Countries like Vietnam, like China, like India, that depend on exports would be impacted a lot. Stimulus package is another major thing, similar to 2008 crisis. US economy में around $1 trillion का stimulus package दिया गया था just to tackle COVID, and most of these were in the form of loans and government spending and even tax cuts. Central bank also reduced interest rates to near zero in US. Achha, why are interest rates lower in US compared to India? What do you think is the reason? Interest rates in US are around 1-2-3%. FD पे भी इतना ही मिलता है, 2% ज़्यादा नहीं मिलेगा. Inflation exactly. तो real terms में अगर देखें after adjusting for inflation, it would be almost similar only, है ना? वहाँ पे inflation भी बहुत कम है, 2% 3% ज़्यादा नहीं होती. यहाँ पे 5-6% minimum है, and that is also official government estimates. Reality, obviously Modi ji will not tell you the right picture, है ना? हाँ exactly. तो वो और उसमें भी if you look at food and fuel inflation which matters most to us, food and fuel inflation is greater than 10%. That is according to actual government estimates. Unofficially it would be much higher. Fine. So $3 trillion injected by US Federal Reserve to stabilize markets. CARES Act, another stimulus package. Fine. EU also introduced a recovery fund. US dollar was again, it's whenever there is uncertainty, global uncertainty, people start investing in assets like gold, and in terms of currency, everyone goes to safe currencies like dollar. Supply chain was again impacted. So there are a lot of similarities from what we were discussing earlier in 2008 crisis also. Lot of similarities are there according in COVID as well. But one main difference was that in COVID we saw a very sharp recovery, a V-shaped recovery. Even stock markets rebounded within 3 months only. एक महीने में 40% crash हुआ और 3 महीने में फिर से all time high बन गया. Fine. So, but in case of 2008, it took around 1.5–2 years for the economy to again come back to normal, and the stock markets to again hit all time high. Capital outflows, so it will have again a similar impact on capital flows. Investors will start taking out money, and whenever there is global panic or uncertainty, we would like to keep everything in cash. Fine. So inequality is one more important issue which we were talking about in unit 1, which is part of distributional issues. So same thing is there. Whenever there is any crisis that leads to greater inequality, economies that are developed, more advanced, they are faster to recover. They have more resources. Obviously, they can government can give more stimulus, and they will be faster to recover. But other countries will lag behind, and certain sectors within the economy will be impacted much more. Some will not be impacted so much. Like in case of COVID, you had, which were the most highly impacted sectors? किस पे ऊपर सबसे ज़्यादा एडवर्स नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट आया था? विच सेक्टर? हाँ, ओके, इज इट ओके? ट्रैवल एंड टूरिज्म, hospitality, restaurant, all the hotels and everything, airlines, they were highly impacted, है ना? Similarly, even big, luxury items were also impacted a lot because their elasticity of demand is much greater. जो भी चीज़ें which are highly elastic in nature, their demand is highly elastic, will be impacted much more. Yes, job losses in low wage sectors increased wealth inequality. That is what we were talking about in distributional issues. There can be different kinds of distribution issues within, trade or international business can lead to disparity amongst different countries. Some countries may be positively affected by the international business, some may be negatively impacted. Secondly, it can lead to disparity within the country between different sectors. Some sectors will be which are dependent on exports and imports, may be impacted in times of crisis. Others may not be, will be insulated. Fine, it can have an impact between different income groups within the same country as well. So there can be different distributional challenges, issues arising due to international business and international relations between different countries. Now, what was the role played by international regional trading blocs, by the international agencies, by institutions like World Bank and IMF? That again we'll look at. Right, so since this was a global pandemic, it was having a major impact globally, there was need for again international cooperation between different countries, and for that there was a need for coordinated approach where countries were coming together, especially in terms of supply of vaccines, that was a major issue, and supply chain and all this had to be maintained across different countries, and that was why there was a need for international global cooperation. So commodities like food, like medicines, like vaccines, like PPE, all of them were exchanged amongst different countries during the pandemic. So some of these initiatives were taken, like European Union introduced a concept called green lanes. So this means that within the European Union, between different countries, these PPE and vaccines and medicines and food and everything could be transported easily across borders without much checks, without much screening. That was one initiative. Then recovery fund we have discussed by EU. Similarly, a recovery fund by US was also introduced. A stimulus package of $3 trillion was introduced by US. ASEAN also made a comprehensive recovery framework. African Union had a free trade area to encourage again trade in all these things, including supplies, including food and medical supplies, PPE and all these things, and vaccines. Now WTO, IMF, World Bank and WHO, they also played a crucial role. WHO we know was responsible for this, they were constantly putting out data all the time, what is happening, what is the next, what precautions must be taken. All the guidelines were being put by WHO. Although their role was coming under scrutiny, they were not acting on time, they were giving out information, they were not giving out information on exactly on time. Then World Bank also provided health support to poor countries that were lagging behind, especially in terms of medical facilities, in terms of medical supplies and PPE and vaccines and everything. IMF provided debt relief and emergency financing to various countries because all the economies were contracting. They were some of them were unable to meet their short-term liabilities, and they required funds from IMF. And WTO, because trade was contracting amongst different countries, it contracted by almost 5% globally. So WTO was trying to ensure that everything comes back to normal, and they even introduced this thing called they were focusing on IPR, intellectual property rights, especially in terms of vaccines and health supplies. Like vaccines, can the IPR be transferred from one country to the other, so that other countries are also able to manufacture the similar kind of vaccines. And some of the major impacts globally after the pandemic were all of these, including digitalization, including this central bank digital currencies. Like in India also, we are having the concept of digital rupee, which is now being promoted by RBI, and gradually it will become much more important and mainstream over the next 5 years. Fine. ESG, environment, social and governance investing. Like we were talking about impact investing, similarly ESG is becoming really prominent these days, and because of these kind of major crises that have happened, health emergencies and everything, people are realizing the need for looking after all these major issues like climate change, like these maintaining overall environment friendly policies. They are becoming much more important. The concept of green trade, green finance that we were discussing earlier on, that is becoming much more relevant these days. And monetary policies, again, aggressive monetary policies were introduced, and generally they are done during any crisis. Supply chain and trade finance. Okay. Fine. Right. So we have seen a few case studies. Similarly, you can have other case studies as well. Read about major issues like what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. Read about what happened with Enron. You know, different major events that have happened in the past, and how have these other global agencies participated, how have they tried to make the system much more stable. Fine, the role of these international trade groupings, regional trade blocs, and also the global organizations like IMF, World Bank, BRICS Development Bank, all these, what are the role that these agencies are playing. Right, so you should read about Bretton Woods conference, which we were discussing earlier today, how World Bank was formed, how IMF was formed. Bretton Woods conference is one important thing. Read about green finance. Countries like France and China are doing taking very aggressive steps, especially with respect to green finance. So you should be knowing about green finance, about all these major events that have happened in the past, and the role played by international agencies and regional trade blocs in maintaining global financial stability. Fine, so that's it. I'll be sharing, yes, you can close this thing. I'll be sharing the important points on the group. Are you all there on the group?